Hello, everyone. Welcome. And thank you so much for joining us today for our special event celebrating Emme Lund and her debut novel, The Boy with the Bird in His Chest. We're in for a special treat today. Emme is in conversation with Andrew Sean Greer. My name is Evan Karp. I'm the events manager for Booksmith. We're an independent bookstore in a mainstay of San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district since 1976. Andrew Sean Greer is the Pulitzer Prize winning author of 6 works of fiction, including the bestsellers The Confessions of Max Tivoli and Less. He's the recipient of an NEA grant, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the 2018 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. He lives in San Francisco and Milan. His next novel, Less is Lost, will be out soon in September, and we're all very excited for that. Emme Lund is an author living and writing in Portland, Oregon. She has an MFA from Mills College. Her work has appeared in Electric Literature, Time, The Rumpus, Paper Darts, and many more. In 2019, she was awarded an Oregon Literary Arts Fellowship in fiction. The Boy with the Bird in His Chest is her first novel. You can visit emmelund.net for more information. Em, it's such a delight to see you, and I'm so proud of you and excited for this book and to celebrate it. Andy, thank you so much for being here and leading the conversation. I'm excited to turn it over to you too.
Evan, thank you. I should tell everyone who's listening that to begin with, that you should, if anything we say bores you or you're distracted, that is the moment to come up with a question to put in the chat, because we're going to answer those questions at the end. So, or if you're intrigued by something, that's the moment to put in a question in the chat, because we're going to look at those at the end. So that's your job while we're talking. Em, I should let you all know that we've known each other a very long time, and I have watched Em from a wanting to be writer to a working to be writer to a published author with a fantastic book. And I think what the thrill that I have is I'm not your teacher, I'm your friend, but it's just to watch the flow of admiration that comes since this book has come out, which is just a few weeks now, I think.
Tuesday,
yeah, Tuesday. It's not very long, but I mean, maybe I forget, like, how does it feel to have become,
I think I'm still becoming. Yeah, it feels amazing. I mean, I've known you a very long time. We met probably 15 years ago. And you're always such an inspiration and a mentor and a good friend to me. Yeah, it's just, I'm getting messages from readers. We had, reviews are coming out and people are just saying the kindest things. I always told myself that I would feel successful if there were readers who were grateful for my work, and I'm just getting those messages, and it just makes it all worth it. I don't know if you can remember this because you've been successful for so long, but for a long time you're just writing in a room and no one knows about it, and you're just sort of I joked the other day, I was a bartender until this weekend, that for a long time I was a secret writer who was a bartender, and now I'm for a while I was a writer who was a secret bartender. But there's just these moments you're just writing in a room and no one really cares or knows if you're going to have a book come out, and you're just working on it anyways. And then to reach the end of that and have people really care about the work and tell you they feel seen in the story and to thank you for writing it is just the absolute greatest pleasure. Yeah, it's thrilling. I mean,
it's thrilling to read the book. I think when I first read it, the most fun of reading a book by someone is when it doesn't seem like they wrote it. Like it's something so much, not that you're not big enough, but like it's something greater and larger than you imagine. Well, because they've worked on it for, I think, 7 years or something. So they've built a world that you're entering all at once. And it was just, I totally forgot about you. And I became just entranced by a story of, well, maybe you can give us your quick version, what you tell about the story of this book.
Yeah. So the boy with the bird in his chest follows Owen Tanner, who, when he is a baby, a small bird, a literal bird, emerges from behind his ribs. Um, and his mother is very paranoid that if he's discovered, he'll be taken away from her and shipped away for experiments and sort of maybe tortured by the medical establishment. And so she hides him away in their house until he's 14 years old. Um, and as Owen turns 14, he starts getting curious. He can't really stand being inside the house anymore. And so he starts to wander outside, and he ends up putting himself in some real danger. And because of that, his mother whisks him away to live in the Puget Sound, Washington, with her brother, his uncle, and his daughter, Tennessee. He's able to have like a much fuller life in Puget Sound. He meets friends. He discovers punk music. He gets to stand next to the ocean. He discovers his sexuality, and yeah, he gets to find what it feels like to find community. Ultimately, it's a book about hiding parts of ourselves away from the world, um, how we determine who we share ourselves with, who's safe to share ourselves with, and that ultimately that feeling of being seen and sharing yourself with your community and your chosen family and being loved for it.
There's a great moment when he and his friends sort of build the fort, which is, it feels like a sort of teenage bohemian world. Is that something that you pulled from your life, or that you sort of wished had happened to you, or you recognize?
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up in Salem, Oregon, is where I was living when I went to high school, just, you know, Oregon state capital. Not small in numbers, but small in mindset, maybe. You know, it was hard to have shows and things here. I was very into punk music. And so all of the venues I went to, there was one called The Cottage that was just somebody's garage behind like their old uncle's house. We went to one, it was a storage unit out in like the outside of Salem that was just a literal storage unit that people used to rent, and we would have shows there and drink and hang out. We play shows like in the park at night sometimes. And I often drove up to Portland. I'd sneak out of my parents' house and drive up to Portland and see punk shows.
Did they know that?
I mean, maybe they do now. Yeah, there was one show in particular I snuck out to when I was probably 15. My friend was also 15, and his parents had bought him a car, but he didn't have his driver's license yet. He snuck out and I guess technically stole his own car, and we all drove up to Portland to see this band Quasi and Hazel and Harvey Danger play. Yeah, so I just spent a lot of time in these sort of secret DIY venues growing up. That was where we were allowed to play music and watch music. And I was talking with a good friend a couple years ago, and they were telling me about this musician they had met who had played a show on this island up, I think it was in Vancouver, BC. But the island was only accessible during certain tides because the tide would rise and cover the island and then it would sink down. And so they took a boat to this island, and he only had like a few hours to play the set before the tide rose again and they all had to take boats back. And I loved that idea of like basing, you know, a concert series or a set of punk shows based on like the tide and this super secret DIY venue in the middle of the woods that, you know, I think that when you're a teenager and you love music, if you don't have access to spaces that yeah, let you play music and listen to music, you make your own, like where kids find a way to make those spaces even if adults don't give them access to them. And so I wanted to capture that in the book.
I mean, here's a note of envy, which is that I was so straight-laced. I lived in Washington, D.C., or right outside of it. I went to school there, where it was an amazing punk scene, and I never participated. I had nothing to do with it. I missed out on the whole thing. So I can't even claim it's generational. it wasn't until much later going to Berlin that I got into anything that was that cool. But like, what was it about punk in particular that connected with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was really attracted to, I mean, the political stance of most punk bands, the anti-capitalist sort of leftist stance. I grew up in a really conservative, sheltered, evangelical household. And so I didn't get access to any of those ideals in my home. There's a really vibrant energy about punk music that I've always loved. The way, and I mean, being in punk shows is still one of my favorite feelings, just the feeling of the music and how the crowd often responds is just so incredible. Yeah, I also, I was closeted for a long point in my life. I came out as a queer person in my 20s and then later as a trans woman in my 30s. And I think that really deep down, I was attracted to sort of the queer aesthetics, the androgyny, and sort of
So it felt a little queer also, the punk scene. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, of course, there's some homophobia and things within the punk scene as there is with every scene. But there is a big embrace of queerness, of just really accepting everyone as they are, no matter how big of a freak someone else may peg them as. Yeah, I mean, there's so much that attracts me to punk music still.
I want to, because I'm a writer, I want to talk with you about writing the book. And I understand it's impossible to talk about in a certain way, because I want to know how you did it, and you'll answer, I have no idea. But I'm going to try to ask some questions about, did you feel, I mean, it's a story about a boy with a bird in his chest. Did you feel you had a specific idea what that was an allegory for, or that you wanted it to be open and just explore it as you wrote?
Yeah, I mean, really the idea was sort of bred out of this notion that I knew I wanted to write a queer coming of age story, and I knew I wanted it to center queer joy and abundance. There's so many lovely coming of age stories that do center queerness and sort of that coming out story. And a lot of them tend to center pain or sort of this feeling of overcoming someone's own internalized homophobia to embrace their queerness. I didn't really want that for Owen. And so sort of my solution to that was to give him a bigger problem to deal with. I mean, a literal bird inside of his chest it's bigger fish to fry than coming to terms with the fact that he also loves boys. And so that was sort of my way to handle that and sort of give him space to like explore his queerness, but never really struggle with it and never really I didn't want it something to be he had to come to terms with. I just wanted, all of the issues he faces with his queerness are external. Nothing is internal. And even the external ones are sort of further removed from outside of his core friend group and chosen family. Yeah, I think everyone is really so excited to talk about the book, and they're like, clearly an allegory for transness and queerness.
I don't see it. I mean, that's when I'm reading it, I'm like, I think that, and I know you won't be able to put your finger on it, but I love you talking about that, because I think you and I are both interested in writing books about queer joy or human joy that being like, there's a lot of great, wonderful books already on the shelf about pain and suffering, and there might be room for some others that are about transforming and celebration, and that for me it felt like I couldn't ever put my finger on what it was a metaphor for, which let me make it anything I wanted. that I could make it. For me, reading it, I made it my sense of not queerness, but just weirdness, you know, my growing up. That's
Yeah.
what it felt to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, I think it's obviously a queer book, and I'm a trans woman who wrote it, and so there's a lot of transness in here, even if the characters aren't explicitly trans. But for me, I mean, it's really just a book about like what it feels like to feel like you're the only person in the world who feels a certain way, and having no way to confirm it because you're terrified of sharing that part of yourself, terrified of what people will say. It's scary to be vulnerable with people. And so it was really a way to give Owen a literal thing that he could share with people, and that people could love and embrace potentially, but also something that was scary to share. And I think, you know, of course, those of us who are queer and trans maybe have those feelings in spades, but I'm sure there are straight and cis readers who also maybe know that feeling of God, I feel like I'm the only person who feels this way, and maybe there's others, but if I say something about it, I'm kind of put in danger, or I'm being vulnerable, and that's scary. And that was really what I was trying to capture.
I think that's, at least that's what came through for me. You know, I think of my sissy straight male friends who don't really have a book for them because they don't have, you know, like they just feel like there's something wrong with them, but because they like musicals, but they like when, you know, like there's some, like, and all, or even like the punk folks who just feel like there's something wrong, like in fact all of my friends, all of your friends, like these are the people we know and love, are people who felt uncomfortable in the world and created their own community of like hilarious, supportive people. And I love that this is a sort of formula for anyone to think about building that.
Yeah, and Andy, you're such a good reader. Thank you so much, and so excited to talk with you about this book today because I had a feeling you might connect with certain parts of this book, and I'm so glad that came through. Yeah, and I do want to say too, the book is queer. I mean, I don't want people to be, I don't want anyone to think that I'm sort of eschewing that sort of connotation for this book, because it's very queer, and I made it that way intentionally. But I do think there's, you know, something in there for everyone, maybe, or something in there for straight and cis readers too.
I think so. I mean, well, now I have a even more difficult question about writing, which is that the book is made of sections. Some, I think, four huge sections, or it's four, right? 3 or 4?
It's 4.
Uh,
It was 5 and now it's 4. I'm trying to remember because we cut one of the sections out. So
I'm gonna ask about that now. I'm going to ask about that in a second. And then it's made of very small sections that are their own sort of chapter, and then it begins on a new page. How did you choose that format, and how did you write those pieces? And did they come up in that order, or did you kind of find where they belong?
Yeah, so I mean, I really tend to overwrite. I'm a slow sort of plodder through. I sort of plod through my work and wade into the story. Um, and writing is really discovery for me. And so, I mean, originally this book was, I think, 500 pages long, and I knew that was too long, and we didn't need all this. And so I cut it down and kept cutting down, and would send to friends, and they would give me notes, and I would cut more and more. And I rearranged a lot of parts. I kind of inserted some things and took others out. But ultimately, I mean, thank God for my agent, Cassie Manis Murray, who I sent her a draft of the book, and she loved it and was like, yes, it's almost ready. We need to figure out the pacing, and we need to figure out the structure of the book. And so we sat down, and she had sent me edits, I think, at one point, and I fixed them and went through and addressed her notes and kind of took some things out and kind of made some relationships stronger. I tried to highlight certain relationships in the book that I thought were important, that I had sort of missed before. And then, I mean, I think she emailed me on like a Saturday morning, and she was like, okay, I actually think we need to cut your chapters shorter. And like, here's an idea. And she sent me back a few ideas for shorter chapters. I mean, there's a chapter I think that's like 1 line long in the book. And that really, I just like, you know, those moments where the whole project just kind of syncs up and feels sort of heaved together in those magical moments where I was like, yes, that's it. And I went through and made those changes. And it really, after that, that's when I think I sent you a copy and we got ready to send it on submission to sell it. And then the final version with where we went from 5 sections down to 4 was my editor at Atria, Melanie, who was just really a fantastic editor and so grateful for her guidance. And we had an early editorial meeting and she was like, again, the pacing, we need to, and I was like, I know, it's just, it's what happens when you overwrite, you sort of lose that sort of the pulsing thing that keeps you reading because you have to cut things out and it's hard to rethread that through for me. But she was like, okay, so the way I see your book is it's like the ocean and it's a wave. And so you have these like crescending like and pieces of anxiety and sort of conflict that pulse through Owen, and then they sort of recede like a wave and then they come back again. And that really, her saying that and seeing the book in that way opened up, and I was able to cut that 5th section down and kind of really heave it together, and I was able to make the book what it is.
What was the 5th section? I mean, I guess you can't say because people need to read the book and see how it goes. I'm just dying because I'm here an author who just cut my book from 5 to 4 sections after my final draft was due. Yeah. You know, because I think this is something they never talk about in like an MFA program or anything, is the importance of pacing.
Yeah.
Meaning storytelling, meaning if you're at a table with friends, you can, and a bottle of wine, you can kind of go on forever. But if you're a table with people you don't know very well, you kind of have to tell the story better.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing. I had an instructor at Mills, Micheline Markham, who's a fantastic writer, and she was always like, follow the fire. There should be fire that pulls the reader. And I love that idea, but I don't know how to do it. And I still don't know. And I would be like, what does that mean? And she's like, I don't know what it means, but you know it when you know it. And I'm like, that doesn't help me get there.
But now you do know. Do you have any wisdom from this process for us?
I mean, the thing that I wish I had known at the very beginning, and the book took me as long as it took because that's how long it took, but I really wish I had just gotten to the end on my first draft. I'm doing it now with my second book, but the way I wrote the first draft, I kept going back to the first 30 pages and reworking them, and I really wanted to get the beginning right, but I couldn't get the beginning right until I got the end and saw the whole book. And then that was where I was able to really push everything together, pull out what needed to pull out and get it closer to the book it was meant to be. But I spent years rewriting the first 100 pages or so, just really trying to get that right. And I wish, I mean, I know other writers do it and they give this advice, but it's like, just get to the end. And then once you're at the end, you can see the whole story and you can understand how to pull that thread through. When you're sitting at a table with people you don't know and you're telling them this story, you know the ending, so you know how to pace it right to get them to that ending. It's not like you're narrating something as it's happening. So we just need to know the story before we can really get the pacing right, I think, or at least I do.
I find that the beginning is the last thing I write.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course I write it when I start the book, but then when I finish the whole thing, I toss it out and it's the last thing I do because it's only when I finish the whole thing that I know how to begin the story, especially if it's something like a fable. You want to tell it like yours in a way that it feels like something that is maybe classic, like people might already have heard about it in a way, you know, like there's a way of introducing it that I think you do really well.
Thank you. Yeah, at the beginning, I mean, I really, so at the very beginning, Janice has Owen during this great flood in Montana, and he's born at the exact moment that the flood actually floods onto the street. And that was one of the things I just kept reworking because I knew, and this is sort of how writing works for me too. I knew something was off about Owen's birth. I knew it was kind of weird. I knew it was like something weird kind of happens as he's being born. And I just kept trying to figure out what that was and kept rewriting it and rewriting it. And like, I think at one point, like she's lying on the couch and the neighbor kid hits a baseball through the window and it hits her stomach and it induces labor, you know, just weird things like that. And then it wasn't until I wrote the book and I saw this theme of water and Owen feels an attraction to water. He feels a big pull to the water. And I knew that he had to be born at a time when water was prevalent. And so what better time than when the town is flooding?
It's again, it's just shocking that there was any other way that it happened, because the book is so structured that he's kept away from water for a long time, and then he feels most natural in water. It just feels like it's part of the book. Now, he feels amazing that there was a baseball.
So many other things, and I was like, I know it's weird, but I can't figure it out. And it was, of course, now I know I shouldn't have been trying to figure it out. I should have just gotten to the end, and then I would have landed there eventually, because that's how the story goes. But
I know, but I always think it's a struggle either way. Like if you plan it all out and you follow your strict outline, then you can get to the end and then you realize the whole thing's a fraud because you didn't write what the book really wanted to be. Or you can feel your way through and keep rewriting, and it feels you're totally lost and you're following a maze like the wrong way, like just by taking every dead end, and both of them are awful.
Yeah. Writing is torture.
I like the second one. The second one, doing it the maze where you take every wrong end. That's the way that makes sense to me.
And at least then you get to see dead ends and see parts of the maze you wouldn't have seen otherwise. So
did you ever put back anything that you had cut years ago and that you remembered and you were like, now it's time for it to come back?
Yeah. So there were some scenes. Owen and his friend Clyde really start to hang out towards the end of the book. And originally they hung out for a lot of the book, and their friendship was sort of the focus. And then I decided that it was too much and the story was too long, and so I cut out almost all of it. And then when I sent the book to my agent, she was like, I think what happened was there was a draft in between where I wrote, I had much longer scenes, and then she asked me to come down, so I cut it down to almost nothing. And then she was like, well, we need more than this. And so in my next draft, I actually pulled not from the big chunk I had cut just a month or two earlier, but I went back to a draft I had written, I think 2 years earlier, that had just really kind of short scenes with them together that I sort of sprinkled throughout the book.
That is an amazing amount of diligent work. That really sounds like writing to me.
Are you saying I'm not a fake, Andy? Because I'll
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that just really sounds like hell.
Yeah, it was.
It also sounds like being able to hold the whole, it sounds like after maybe you talk with your agent and your editor, that you had a vision of the book in your head, and you were able to keep in your head also these other versions that existed, so that you could, was there ever a point where you were like, got to the top of the mountain and you thought, I see the book, I know what to do?
Yeah, I mean, it happens several times, I think, for me throughout the writing process. There was a point when like I was working on a first draft, and I think it was about a month before I actually finished the draft, where, you know, I felt like I was always sort of writing to the next scene and to the next problem and the next piece of conflict. But there was a point where I saw the end and I knew how the book ended, and I just had to write it and was like, oh, I know how the next 100 pages go. And I think I wrote it in about a month. And so there was that point. And then again later when I was working on a draft, before I started querying agents, where I read the whole book in one sitting and had made a ton of notes, and had sort of at the end of that, I understood what I needed to do to put it together so that it at least read like a story. And then the final time was that meeting with Melanie when she said my book was the ocean. And I just, after that, you know, when someone said, it was one sentence, but it just clicked in my brain and I saw the whole fucking thing and just knew, just was like, okay, I know what I got to do. And it was 2 months of drafting, and was so, it seemed easy at that point to just sort of move things around and make it right.
How were you able to do all that while you were bartending?
Who knows? I mean, it was a lot. I tried to write 25 hours a week, and I was also bartending 30 to 35 hours a week, and then trying to have some sort of semblance of a social life on top of that. Yeah, I mean, it was all I did. I would wake up in the mornings and, you know, kind of, I'm not anything in the morning. I'm sort of an amorphous blob. So I would do that for an hour, and then I would sit at my desk and write for 4 or 5 hours, and then get ready and go to work and bartend until 11 at night, and then go to sleep and do it again.
That's the life. To someone out there, that sounds very glamorous.
Yeah, well, good for them. Happy it's glamorous for someone. Yeah, I mean, it was what I had to do. I wanted to write. I wanted to work a job that meant that no one emailed me on my day off, that no one called me, that I didn't think about a single. I would get off work and I would come home and look at the clock and talk for 5 minutes to my wife about the day I had, and then would just shut it down and move on. And bartending was something that was fairly lucrative, and I could do that and have all my mental energy saved for writing. So while it was tiring, it's what made sense to me. I've got friends who are like copywriters and do all sorts of office work, and I love that they can do that, but that just wipes my brain out almost more than bartending did. So it was my option.
There was, when I was really young, I remember a friend of my mother telling me, if you want to be a writer, your day job should not be writing, because then you will use it all up, it'll dry up. And I really took her seriously. So my day jobs were like, I mean, you know, I applied to be a bartender, but no one would hire me. So
I would have hired you.
Shitty thing. Yeah. No, you wouldn't. Not very good at it.
Nepotism, maybe. Yeah, I just, it was also helpful to have a job that I didn't want to do for the rest of my life. I could not see myself bartending into my 50s, or even well into my 40s. And so it just was sort of my care. It's like, if I write this book and someone pays me for it, and then I write another book and someone pays me for that one, then I don't have to do this anymore. So yeah, it was sort of what kept me going.
So you're not still a bartender?
No, so the 13th of this month was my last shift at the bar. The 14th was my birthday, and the 15th the book came out. So it's been a busy week, but yeah, I'm currently not bartending. Thank you.
Happy freedom.
Yes, it feels good. I mean, I had a good year and a half during the pandemic where I wasn't bartending too, because the bar closed down, and I got put on unemployment. So that was a little bit different than this. I got to say goodbye to my coworkers and got to say goodbye to the restaurant and staff in a way that felt nice. and not scary when it was March 2020 and we were just sort of standing 8 feet apart, waving goodbye and saying maybe we'd see each other in a month. Yeah, it feels a bit more like closure.
Well, that's good. You're a good person to want that closure, to want that decency. I'm curious whether you have found in the past couple of whether you've reached out to a trans writing community and how you found them and whether that's been a community that's been useful for you.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of friends who are writers and who are trans. I mean, I've got good friends here in Portland. I'm friends with Cosima B. Concordia, who's a fantastic writer, and Nora Broker, who's another good writer here in town. I have friends who live in other cities, of course. You know, Davy Davis lives in Brooklyn. I've known them since we lived in Oakland together when we were in grad school. Zoe Tuck I met in grad school as well. Well, we didn't go to grad school together, but we lived in Oakland together and met while I was in grad school. Recently connected with Casey Platt, who's a fantastic trans writer living in Canada right now. I think, you know, the way you make that community is the way you make any community, which is by being in a space with them. So going to readings and when there's physical readings or virtual readings when you can. Some of them I just read their work and really liked it and just reached out online and said, hey, you're a great writer. Thank you. and you know, you start talking to people and you know, they talk back. I'm so happy to be in community with so many trans writers right now. Tori Peters is doing really well and so happy for her for that. And yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it's hard right now with no in-person events really. No one's really going out because of COVID. But I mean, honestly, as hard as it is to say, Twitter and Instagram are a good place to start connecting with those writers if you want to.
That's good, because I know that there are writers out here watching this who are wondering in these times where my old-fashioned advice is go to the open mic at the bar down the street, and if there's no open mic and if you don't drink, then how do you meet other writers, you know?
Yeah, you start your own open mic. That's a sober open mic in your backyard. And you invite your favorite writers to read. Or, I mean, you reach out. I have real friends, in real life friends who I met on Twitter, who I started messaging and talking with, who we eventually were like, should we get coffee? And it led to that. And you can do it too. I believe you can. Whoever you are out there, you can do it. Just take the plunge.
I think that's great advice also, always. Like if there's something missing, then you invent it yourself. That like it's for the new generation. If there's a gap somewhere, or if there's something that irritates you about what's existing, then replace it. You know,
make it yourself.
Make it better. Make something better than what they have. Yeah.
When we first moved to Portland, I felt like there weren't good reading series and they were sort of flaky. And so I decided to start my own flaky reading series just in the backyard at the house where I was living. And we would host them through the summer. And it was so great. I met a ton of lovely writers who are still my friends today. I think Never North read with us once, Rex Leonowich. It was so great. And it was just fun and really, I mean, it was work, but it was really easy work. It was the sort of thing that every day I would get sort of nervous before the reading, but then the time would come and people would show up and it was just so easy to have those writers in my space. And yeah, really, I highly recommend it for anyone thinking about it.
That is good advice. Even during the pandemic, I joined a poetry discussion group of just people put together that became a very close group of friends just over Zoom. You know, I've never met any of these people in person. Like, it still feels possible for me to have that connection I used to have at real readings.
Yeah, I think COVID has taken so much from us. This pandemic has really just, it feels like it's wrung us dry in a lot of ways. But I think community is still possible. It looks different, and the way we form it is going to look different. But you can still, I mean, it still feels the same when I'm emailing back and forth and on Zoom, and then maybe eventually we meet in person. But yeah, it's taken a lot from us, but we can't let it take everything from us.
Well, here's some questions that are from the group, and everybody, please keep sending things to Evan at Booksmith. A question for oh, here's one for you, Melrose. One thing that struck me and surprised me when I first read was that Gail speaks, and not only speaks, but has an entire personality, pretty distinct in some ways from Owen. Can you talk a little bit about the thought writing process for Gail? Did she go through different iterations in terms of her either personality, behavior, relationship to Owen? And you may have to explain who Gail is.
Yeah, so Gail is the bird that lives inside of Owen's chest that appears shortly after he's born. She's very chatty. She loves to tell him jokes. She's moody too, and sort of throws temper tantrums and things at times. Yeah, it always made sense that Gail would talk. That's the way my brain works. I mean, when I was really early on writing this book, and even throughout it, every time I went to the pet store, I would go and watch the Java sparrows fly around in their little cages that were for sale at the pet store, and I'd watch them, and they're very playful birds, and they're kind of sing-songy in their tweets, and they love to dip in water and play in water a lot. And so they seemed like they had so much personality already that it just made sense that she would talk. I mean, and also it's that sort of thing where I'm like, well, I already put a bird in his chest. I can make her talk too. I mean, if someone's going to believe that, they're going to believe that she's speaking too. And I decided very early on that I wasn't going to like explain why she spoke or how she spoke or anything. I was just like, nope, she talks. And you know, when you embrace it and it just is, the readers tend to accept it too. But yeah, she always was chatty. She was always funny. She just came to me that way. I think she was always meant to be. Her moodier aspects actually came later in the book. I was like, oh, I think, you know, when you're stuck inside someone and you're sort of trapped with them 24 hours a day, you probably get a little moody and maybe huff and stop talking to them for a period of time. Or yeah, so those came later, but she was always funny and chatty right off the bat.
Well, it gives the book I think it was a very smart choice, though it sounds like it was one of those choices that's accidental almost, or intuitive.
I'll still take credit.
Yeah, well, you were the author, you get to take credit. It's your name on the book. That it provides that sort of that other voice for someone who's very lonely, that there's another voice, and it also provides a kind of structure for the book when Gail isn't talking, you know, and when Gail talks again, it gives it another, not plot, but movement where we're with her, we're not with her.
Yeah, I think, and you know, it was almost difficult at times to juggle the two, because I always, when I'd sit down to write scenes, I would often sometimes, especially when I was editing, I'd be like, oh, we haven't heard from Gail. Is that on purpose? Or is she just, do I need to pay attention to what she's doing in these scenes a little bit more? And so there was a bit of a balancing act of just remembering to bring her in. I don't have a spoiler. I do not have a bird living in my chest, so I had to imagine that. And would often just have to be like, okay, you need to bring Gail in here. She, you know, I think she says something. And it really, because she's so funny, and she does, I mean, she wants Owen to be happy and to find joy and to be safe. And so she often lightens the mood at times when the mood needs lightening. She tries to cheer him up. And I always thought, I mean, it's so splendid to have an animal inside of you that was there trying to help you. Sort of envious of them for that.
Yeah, well, me too, or at least I even felt that I know I'm a weirdo, that I was like, maybe I have a bird in my, maybe I have an inner, I certainly have conversations in my head, like it could be like that experience that's not crazy, but it's actually a bird in my chest. I think I'm sure a lot of readers will feel that way too. Maybe not.
Yeah, maybe, who knows? I hope so.
Just Fred.
I feel like they think they might have a bird in their chest or some other creature somewhere.
We have another question here, which is from Zoe Harris for both of us. What do you listen to, read, watch, etc. when you're writing? Does it differ based on the types of things you're trying to write?
So, I mean, I need almost absolute silence when I'm writing. Unless we have a dog who barks a lot at our house here in Portland. And so I will often, the neighbor dog, I don't know what they're doing all day, but it'll just be in the yard barking. It's right next to my writing studio. So I'll put on headphones and I'll search like, for a playlist that's just like easy listening to, easy music to study to, and things like that. But otherwise, I really do, I crave absolute silence. I talk to myself out loud a lot while I write. And so I think, yeah, I just need that silence. I need to be able to hear the rhythm of the sentence and not get distracted by the music that's playing. I do listen to a ton of music throughout my day. And part of my process for writing is I tend to make long playlists for sort of music I think the characters would like, or music that sort of fits the vibes of the book that I'm working on. I had one for this particular book that was, I think, 200 songs long, and it was all of Owen's favorite music that I would listen to. I mean, I listened to it a lot over the course of the years while writing it. It is available as a playlist now. There's a link that maybe someone can drop in the chat if anybody on my publicity team is there. I cut it down to 15 songs, and it's just Owen's favorite music. And there's even, I think it's on the Simon & Schuster website, there's a reader's guide, and it has the annotated song list at the end of it, or it has, I just wrote little notes about why I chose each song for the playlist and how I thought it fit into the book.
And what do you read?
Mostly when I'm writing, I read poetry. I almost always have a collection of poems that I'm reading, and it really is the sort of thing where I'll write until I get frustrated, and then I'll pick it up and read a few poems, maybe read them out loud. Poetry is so good for attention to language. I feel like it makes me smarter when I read it. Poetry is mostly what I read. And then, I spend every morning when I'm that amorphous blob sort of waiting around my house, waiting for my brain to turn on, usually reading novels or short fiction or essays. But while I'm writing, it's almost always poetry.
That is exactly what I do too. I read poetry because I feel like it's the quick jolt of, it takes you quickly to the artistic place, and it gives you a shock of something you hadn't thought about before. And often the imagery is something that it's not that I steal their imagery, but something else flashes in my brain because it's so dense. It has these different layers. And so something else flashes and reminds me of something I could do. And it gives me ideas in a way that fiction won't necessarily do.
It feels like the heart paddles, right? Like that sort of just like you're lying there dead on the OR table.
Yeah. For me, I put up Philip Glass. I read Wallace Stevens, and it works somehow.
I know, but then once I do the same thing minus the Philip Glass, but then I find that like I can also tend to procrastinate with that too, and there'll be times where I'm like, oh, I'm having a hard time writing today, and it's because I don't have any poetry around, so guess I'm not getting any work done today.
Ooh, there's never no poetry around. Here's a question from Melanie Iglesias. How do you refill your creative well? What or who do you turn to when you feel tapped out and stuck while writing?
Yes, that's Melanie, my editor at Atria. Hi, Melanie. I'm so glad you're on. What a good question. You know, I tend to, if I'm really feel like I'm out of ideas, I do a couple things. I tend to just sit and I'll do something like journal. I'll take out some pages and just try to write the messiest, weirdest thing, and just weird things that could never happen. I just, a spaceship comes down and inside there's 5 goblins and an elf, and just make up the weirdest thing. And I feel like that can kind of sort of unblock any sort of creative blocks I'm having. I just try to read and watch a lot of movies and try to engage with art often. And then also sometimes I honestly have learned a little bit later in my writing that I just need to step away. Sometimes when I feel like the well is dry, what I actually need to do is maybe go have dinner with friends, maybe sit down and play Zelda for 2 hours, do something that's different, go for a walk, get away from the desk, and give my brain space to sort of turn those gears. Lately, I do feel like I tend to overwrite and overwork. And so, currently I'm working on 4 essays and short stories and another book. So I do feel like there's almost not enough time to write these days, which is such a great feeling to have. But yeah, of course, writer's block comes for us all.
I think that's smart advice to step away. I think it's something that maybe in the American culture we don't allow ourselves to do, but like it cannot just be squeezed out constantly,
And I think sometimes we end up sitting at a desk not working, and then when we could be, it's such a funny way to put it, but like productively resting, like actually resting instead of just staring at a screen and being mad and trying to read poems when we're not feeling it. And really your spirit or your brain is just asking for you to do something else. And then it comes to you again.
I think at my lowest, this was right before I wrote less, my lowest, there was nothing in the tank. And I just thought, I'm going to take long walks around San Francisco and pay attention and take notes on things, like really carefully look at the world around me. And I don't know if that led to the book in any way, but it certainly was the right way to go. But I also, these days, I also allow myself to go out to dinner, to get out.
Yeah. Sit down and really for me, I'm very extroverted, and I love to be in a space with other people, which has been hard in the pandemic. But when I can, just sitting and just talking with a friend over dinner or drinks or whatever is so inspiring, and also just lets my brain work. I feel like, your brain just needs to be exercised in other ways sometimes. So yeah, observing something or having an engaging conversation with someone or whatever it is.
Yeah. There is, Zach also wanted to know, maybe this is related, what poems have most inspired your writing or our writing? That's always hard to say because
all of them.
Different times, like it's happened at different things, that whatever is necessary at the moment,
Yeah, I will say while I was writing this book, I read a lot of Banu Kapil, who's a really fantastic British Indian author. Her work is so engaging and weird and strange. And like the way she tells, there's sort of lyrical stories that she writes. And oh yeah, I just kept returning to her work while I was working on this book.
Okay, that's a good tip. Banu Kapil.
Banu Kapil. So it's Bhanu, and last name is Kapil.
All right. Are you in touch with that poet, or is she passed?
No. I think what's the school in Colorado? Oh, she teaches here in the States. I've seen her speak a few times at AWP. She's a contemporary writer. I should reach out to her maybe sometime.
You should reach out to her. I bet poets like that. Evan says she's amazing. Do it.
I mean, I've been in a room with her. We've been at parties together before. Like I've definitely talked with her, but yeah, I just haven't reached out and told her.
Tag her. Yeah. Everyone likes that. Does anyone have another question for Em today for our conversation? Because we're just about at the end, which is sad because it is so good. I'm so excited about this book. I mean, I just think it's so beautiful, and I know you've worked so hard on it, but in fact, it reads like it's just a fable we've always known. You know, it's just completely natural, and only another writer would know how hard it is to make something look really easy. And I think you've done it.
Thank you, Andy. I mean, you've always been such an inspiration to me. Your friendship has always meant the world. And as I said in my acknowledgments in my book, you always made the possibility of being a queer, successful writer possible for me. And so I'm just so grateful for our friendship and so glad you could be here today to say such nice things about me.
Wow, what a delight. Say hi to Iris and Stella for me.
Of course.
Oh, I love you both so much. Em, I'm so proud and so happy for you. And I have enjoyed this conversation so much. It's been so good to see you, and what a wise, lovely talk and conversation, you guys. For those of you who are watching at home, if you don't have the book, get it now. There's a link you can order direct from Booksmith, but also if there's a local independent bookstore just down the street, you might consider just walking in and buying it there. And making sure that they have the book and get it from them. Just get the book. That's what I'm trying to say, and enjoy it. And take care of yourselves. And congratulations and best of luck with the journey of the book. And I can't wait to see what happens next. And hopefully we can host you in person for the next one.
I love that. Thank you, Evan. I think my publisher sent book plates to Booksmith as well, signed book plates. So if you do, correct me if I'm wrong, if you do order the book from Booksmith, you do get, I wrote little notes on each of them and I signed my name. So you get that with the book when you order. Thank you, Evan and Booksmith. It's always great. Evan published my very first chapbook, The Sacred Text of Rosa, who is great, and probably half a decade ago now. And Andy, thank you so much. This is so lovely seeing you again, friend.
Thank you all. Have a good weekend, everybody. Keep the love fest going, and be well out there. Have a good day.